Hey, yo, guys, what's good? Today, me and Henry are going to be talking about the Communist Manifesto. You want to say anything about the Communist Manifesto, Henry?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, definitely a lot to say. I don't know, it's kind of funny that it's like I mean, it still is by far the most famous writing of Marx, probably.
Yeah, I don't know why that is. The Communist Manifesto, it was created for the Communist League. And it does explain a couple things well. I think it does explain historical materialism well. It explains exactly how Marx thinks capitalism will be overthrown, like parts of it. It explains Marx's critiques of capitalism a little bit and his critiques of and his responses to critiques of communism. But other than that, uh I think Das Kapital or another work by Marx, like, I don't know, even like the Civil War in France or, something like that is much more indicative of Marx's works than the Communist Manifesto. For some reason, this has become the most popular one.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I have to admit, though, it is really cool that, it was kind of cobbled together by them as a way to sort of have some sort of pamphlet to put out there in order to systematize the 1848 revolutions.
Mhm.
Um, and it's cool that I guess the working classes and the masses were kind of ahead of their writings. They were kind of writing to explain all of this and to kind of explain the working class movements. And nowadays, of course, it's the opposite, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Where
Yeah.
theory is kind of going ahead of working people, or
Yeah.
it's
Yeah. Yeah.
seen as more important.
That's the thing, though. I think the workers' movement has very much slowed down, and Marx is writing in the infancy. I mean, I was just researching the Communist League today, and the way that they set it up was so different from how communist parties or really any party set up today. It was just they would have communes. In the communes, there would be two or three members, right, or like up to 10, I believe, and then they would meet in like this central sort of big assembly, and they would talk about policies and things like that. Marx was writing very much in the infancy of the working class and the working class movements, and so, it's interesting to see just how he, organized back then, pretty much. Especially his fights with Buchanan. I mean, those are very fun, I think, in my opinion, and the way that Marx and Buchanan
Mm,
look exactly like each other, it's like sort of like him or an evil universe, like a Jew-hating
mm.
universe, right?
Evil Mark.
Evil Marx, yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, the
Anti-Semitic
anti-Semitic
Marx.
Marx, yeah. Yeah. So, getting into the Communist Manifesto, Marx begins it by talking about class struggle as the engine of history. And he talked about how this is even pertained like capitalist society. And he's talking about like how it's moved history either by the win of one class over the other or the common ruin of everybody, when class struggle doesn't lead to a decisive victory. How do you interpret that line? To me, it was always Marx talking about the failure of class struggle in late stage Rome.
I mean, wait, sorry, what were you saying? I was just reading this piece of the manifesto while you were saying that, and I did not hear the question.
Oh, how have you interpreted that? Because to me, it was always Marx talking about the failure of the late Roman Empire to ferment its class struggle. But even then, I feel like to some extent we're sort of going towards the path of common ruin of all, like in the modern day. No.
I mean, yeah, I don't know. It's definitely I feel like they're just trying to say, throughout history, like, there's a small group of people that own shit, or they own whatever critical asset there is in that economy, whether it's land or the means of production, and over time, their ability to keep hoarding that is gonna kinda fall apart. But I don't know, I feel like I don't really think that they're talking too much about Rome, to be honest. I feel like they sort of I feel like in a lot of the ways that they talk about Rome, they're kind of going against the view of it as kind of like a collapse and more of just sort of a like even sort of flow of history.
Mm, mm.
I
Well,
don't know. I'm probably totally wrong.
I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. But either way, what I think matters is like if class struggle is not able to ferment itself, everybody gets fucked. Like everybody across the board. I think that's such an important line, that common root of all. And to some extent, it almost feels like Marx says, and he obviously had no idea. I mean, ecology was barely even off the ground, but to some extent, it almost feels like Marx predicted climate collapse under capitalism, right? Like, if we don't end this shit soon, we're all gonna die under that climate catastrophe.
Mm.
Um, I also
Yeah, I
think.
mean, I don't really like, what's that book? Slow Down. I don't really like that book. I don't really like the degrowth people, but I have to say they definitely do make some pretty compelling references to some of Mark's really late notes where he was sort of beginning to observe ecology and trying to have like a materialist understanding of the natural world in a way that's pretty interesting.
Mm, mm. I think degrowth will be important to some extent, but I don't know. Do they fall into liberalism? I've never interacted with their work.
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah, yeah, like reformism and shit like that. Yeah, makes sense. But um, I
Yeah, I don't even, or just like, I don't know. It's just like, I feel like it's just not connected to, I feel like it's just not grounded enough. It's not interdisciplinary enough. I feel like it's too, yeah, kind of disconnected from the reality of what the economy really looks like, what society really looks like, what people's lives really look like,
not
what the
historically
problem of
materialist
climate change
enough.
is. Yeah, and I mean, it's possible to have to have an advanced, growing economy without carbon emissions. I mean, it is. Like, we should focus on that. But anyway, I mean, I don't know, but I think, to be honest though, they're kind of certainly feel like they're kind of figuring out what they think and figuring out a lot of their ideas in the process of writing this because they just kind of wanted something out there. And so there's kind of like a sacrifice
Yeah.
where like a sacrifice of rigor.
Yeah, yeah, because it's being written on the fly, of course. And within it right now, within it, I think Marx really is good at explaining like how capitalism came about. He talks about how it came from the Burgess classes, the guilds. They slowly build up capitalism through trading, and it takes over. And also he sort of perfectly explains why the proletariat is so historically poised to take over the bourgeoisie, and that's like capitalism has simplified class society so much. Um, and I think he's really writing it for the audiences in, those revolutions that are just sweeping Europe, right? Like, they're reading this and they're reading like, "Oh, yeah, capitalism has come out of feudalism, right? The merchants have taken over, they became the bourgeoisie, they overthrew the kings and nobility, all right? And it's simplified class society. So if we can complete these revolutions, we can overthrow class society itself, right? Because the classes have just become two, right? The proletariat and the bourgeoisie, rather than like noblemen and whatever, all the middlemen of the noble classes. It's I think it's to some extent it's so inspiring. The way he's writing, you almost feel as though it's inevitable to some extent. And of course it didn't happen then when Marx was writing it, but I think that economic determinism that so many people are critics of Marxism of, but honestly, I think is not necessarily a bad thing. I think
Yeah.
gives me so much hope, right? Postmodernism has no hope within it.
Yeah, it's like yeah, I saw this movie recently, Millennium Mambo actually, that's kind of evoked that sense of, evoked a period in history where, you know, younger people were kind of promised everything, but what they were given is kind of, very boring and drab and like commercialized. And I feel like that's really kind of what postmodernism is sort of just a kind of disconnected intellectual space to play around in that kind of ignores the material world because at that stage in history, there was kind of a view that the material world is a solved problem, that markets kind of have these natural ways of regulating themselves and that over time all of the things in movies will eventually become real and it's just a much different mentality. But ever since 2008, really, you see this return to um, a much more materialist sort of politics where, the reactionaries even too are talking about how, much more tangible things, tangible problems. Go back to the Bush era, it was about democracy and fighting terrorism. It was absolutely more idealism, but now with a guy like Trump, it's about the invasion of immigrants or, so on and so forth. The prices, it talks about the prices of groceries all the time. And um, so yeah, you can definitely see a resurgence of materially focused politics, like as class struggle intensifies, as crises intensify. But I think what's impressive about the manifesto too, when it comes to determinism, is how compellingly they sort of jump from event to event and just sort of illustrate how all these events caused each other.
Mm.
Um, it's not really explicit that it's not explicit that there's no other way things could have happened, but it's just that everything has a cause and an effect, and that's I think pretty straightforward.
Mm. I think another amazing thing that Marx is able to do is that he's able to admit that capitalism, yeah, exactly what you're saying, like historical materialism, all that, like how this event causes that event. He's able to explain perfectly how capitalism actually is a progressive force over feudalism. It's been able to build all these big factories, these big productive forces. In fact, at one point he says they've been able to build wonders greater than the fucking pyramids. But the issue, and he lays this out perfectly, is that it's controlled by the bourgeoisie. It's under a bourgeois mode of production. There's this capitalist class, it owns the means of production, and there's this proletariat class, and it sells its labor power in the form of wages. Labor power being his uh Hegelian abstraction of labor. It's your potential to do labor. You sell your potential to do labor, and then you actually do the labor. Um, that's what you earn the wage for. And in doing so, Marx is talking about, first of all, people say, he's going through all the arguments, right? I love how much he's able to like break apart the bullshit arguments. Like some if people are all like, he's all like, people are saying we're gonna take away their private property. Well, the free market has already done that for small business owners. Like, who gives a fuck? Like it's so sassy to some extent, right? But he's also able to explain how capitalism can so easily become its opposite, right? Socialism. It's collectivized all of these means of production under these big mega corporations. It's taken all the proletariat out of the feudal mode of production into the countryside and collectivized them into social labor within big industrial cities. Capitalism so easily, and even the nuclear family, right? The nuclear family, which Marx and Engels ultimately saw as a what do you call it? Like a temporary stage within the process of humanity. They identified, that the tribe used to take care of children, and relations used to be much more free. Even the nuclear family has been slowly but surely destroyed under capitalism and turned into a mere money relation. And this allows for, the turning of the opposite, right? The slow destruction of the nuclear family for a much more community oriented sort of raising of children and relations. So, in many ways, he's very succinctly pointing out that capitalism is already creating its opposite, right? We all work together. We all work under socialized labor. All that's really missing is who owns the means of production. And then, through that, we can abolish labor itself, work itself, commodities themselves, money itself, class itself, so on and so forth.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that explanation of the unity of opposites is very interesting. Um, yeah, and how, the seeds of the next stage of history are embedded in the previous stage of history, like how the guilds, he talks about how the guilds in the feudal era had these craftsmanship, had these skills that were required for industry and the industrial mode of production under capitalism, but they were just very limited in because these were all craftsmen doing these things. These weren't assembly lines or factories. Um, it was much more limited, but these kinds of seeds were then absorbed into the capitalist mode of production. And in a similar way, we can think about developments and ideas and technologies within capitalism that are vital and required for the construction of socialism as well. And I think he they imply that in a way that's pretty creative.
Yeah, and I think the way that Marx looks at the industrialism and the industrial age is him and it's not even Buchanan who's who the how the fuck do you say his name?
I don't know any Russian or anything.
Yeah, fuck it. It's not even Buchanan who's his direct opposite. It's Ted Kaczynski, I really believe, who's Marx's opposite. Because the way they look at the Unabomber looked at the industrial age and Marx looked at the industrial age were two separate ways. Marx looked at the industrial age and this new stage of humanity with absolute wonder. He saw the potential it could have if under the right ownership, right? And even the abolishment of ownership itself, as an idea. Um, Under a socialist mode of production as one of the most wonderful things that could befall humanity. The only issue was who owned it. Well, Ted Kaczynski, he viewed industrialism as the issue itself, right? And he wanted to go back to this sort of primitive communist, not even communist, like primitive hunter-gatherer lifestyle. And he didn't really factor in, and he sent in a bomb to a tech couple of tech offices, and he thought that by bombing them people would suddenly return to monkey. It's
Mhm.
too it's too
That
pe-
was his ideology, basically, is a return to monkey.
yeah, it's return to monkey, but
I mean, also, but also, like, I feel like he was just so personally motivated because he just hated other people, like, that he met in academia in the University of Chicago, and it was just I don't even know that he really had any say he was just, like, really, really dumb reactionary, you know what I mean?
yeah, yeah, I mean, but honestly,
I mean, he was just going after, like, academics who were, like, studying chemistry and stuff, like, he wasn't going he didn't even care about industry, it was just, like, science was bad to him.
mm.
It's like, "You know too much." That's what he thought.
Yeah, but it's like you can literally see the exact opposite of what Marx looked at industrialism seeing. Like
Mhm,
it's the
mhm.
exact opposite.
Yeah, yeah, it was just
Yeah,
yeah, I guess that's what makes it a reactionary, like,
yeah.
view as opposed to a, like, progressive one.
I mean, sometimes, I do get tired of the intellectualism and the intellectuals and civilized society. Sometimes I do want to return to monkey too. So maybe he had a little bit of a point. I mean, I don't agree with the Unabomber, but um, like returning to monkey wouldn't be that bad. Sometimes turning off your brain is kind of nice.
It
Though.
would be pretty bad, not to be it would be pretty
It would.
bad.
Oh yeah, actually, it would be, wouldn't it?
I mean, like, no one
there's no antibiotics, are there?
well, not only that, but, like, we need industrial food production to have, like, this many people be alive, like,
Oh,
95% of everyone would die.
oh, you know what? I didn't even think about that. Damn. Damn, did he even think about that? Oh, you know what? Whatever. Moving on, moving on.
Yeah, that's a good question. I
Yeah.
guess he must have, yeah.
Anyways, so and then Marx explains why the bourgeoisie was historically progressive, for to some extent, right? And of course they've long since stopped being a progressive force, and capitalism has long since stopped being a progressive force. And nowadays, in fact, I see communists argue that feudalism was better because they had the communes and land and some sort of security. But I don't. Marx didn't argue that.
And now, it definitely wasn't better also, I mean
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But some communists actually have gone back and said the communes, in which feudal peasants were able to like farm on that commune land, that could have been easily transitioned to
they thought it was
socialism.
but,
Yeah. Um. No, actually, some feminist Marxists. Surprisingly.
uh
Yeah. Yeah. But
feudalism was awful for women, right? I mean, yeah.
debate. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's
Well,
twofold.
anyway,
Twofold. Yeah, yeah. But he talks about how the bourgeoisie are always seeking new markets. It's a never-ending beast. This integrates even the most isolated economy. So capitalism is like a global force, right? It's a global force that's able to put its tentacles into everything, um, and it's centralized in so it can so easily lend itself to a world socialist system. Laborers, and then he also explains this very dialectical inversion where laborers who used to be skilled, right? You used to be a artisan, you used to make a shoe, you used to know every single part of that shoemaking process. They were de-skilled because of the industrial process, right? You were just turned into one motherfucker on an assembly line. You put the laces into the boot as it goes by. um and there's a second dialectical inversion in capitalism where people went from using tools, right, to tools controlling them, right? So, people used to use shovels to increase the productivity, But because of these big industrial machines that are able to run 24/7, they're no longer extensions of man's body. Man is like sort of like a slave to the tools, right? And he's not saying that from like a Ted Kaczynskiist perspective. He's saying the liberation would come from owning the means of production and rather than
Yeah.
them being used for.
And it
But
becomes like the bottleneck. It becomes like the scarce resource where or the most valuable thing that if you control it, you benefit exponentially. Whether whether it used to be land, but now it's means of production.
yeah, yeah. And so the reason he thinks it's historically progressive and the reason he thinks it lends towards socialism is it simplifies class relations, it centralizes the modes of production, like it's sort of hyper centralized and globalized. It keeps on reproducing itself and integrating itself into every single economy. Um, it destroys a lot of the annoying classes like the small business owners, shopkeepers, artisans, though they still do exist to some degree.
Mm.
Um, and it leads to this ever growing productive forces because there's a competition within the market. The capital circuit leads to a never ending growth. And so it does create amazing things. It's just owned by the wrong people and sort of out of whack. Yeah. If you have anything to add.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's I think yeah, I don't know, it's just very incisive. Um what else? I think I think it's interesting that he points out that the bourgeoisie kind of clawed its way upwards out of feudalism and sort of took over feudalism, created capitalism, but the working class, on the other hand, isn't really advancing itself. It's just kind of being further and further and further um, exploited
Mhm.
to the point where it will, you know, it will be able to kind of take over the means of production and create socialism, but it's just not really happening the same way. And it's kind of interesting because usually people will point to the Frankfurt School or Gramsci and say like, well, you kind of need this to understand why um, there hasn't been widespread working class revolution in advanced capitalist countries. But that itself is kind of an interesting explanation. As to why. I mean, the workers consistently more and more atomized and more exploited, whereas the mercantilists and the bourgeoisie were kind of allowed to kind of live this existence, and it wasn't it wasn't assumed that they would be able to pull something like the French Revolution off and sort of reorganize society in their own image in the same way. And they weren't the peasantry, so they weren't kind of under the boot in the same way.
Yeah, speaking of the peasantry, what I like is like Marx does not moralize, right? Because like if during his time he really did have, he really did have like a completely moralistic framework, he would have advocated for the peasantry's liberation, right? He would have advocated the peasantry as the most advanced revolutionary class because the peasantry were getting fucked by capitalism. They were losing their commons. They were becoming, essentially homeless laborers in cities. But instead, he saw the proletariat as the most historically advanced revolutionary class, and that was because it was in a unique position, right? It sold its labor to bourgeoisie, labor power. It controlled the factories, and it knew how to operate. Well, it didn't control the factories. That's the issue. It knew how to operate the factories and run the factories, and it had all this knowledge that was given to it and it was globalized and very centralized and the presidents weren't. They were very isolated and that kind of sort. um I also like how Marx describes the Luddites, these people who want to go back to earlier modes of production, right? Just like Ted Kaczynski, we were just talking about him. And he mentions that like once you have technological advancement, you can't go back to an earlier mode of production. Especially like when a superior one has been created, right? Like you're not going back. Like nobody's gonna go back to horse-drawn buggies now that we have cars, or
Yeah.
even
Because if you're the one guy that says, "Fuck that, I'm gonna, make cars or whatever," then you're, you know, you'd make like $200 or something, and in that society, it'd probably go a long way.
Yeah. And also, it's just the convenience for most people. Like, it's such a hard sell that completely relies on moralism. And to some extent, that's how I feel with like conversations around AI. Like, obviously, AI is very problematic in how it's stolen people's artwork, how it's ecologically damaging, how it just poops out like noxious gases into poor people's neighborhoods in Tennessee, most of the poor people of color. um, but you're not I mean, communists are sort of taking this position that, like, we should tell the working class to stop using something that, makes their, day-to-day work or something or easier, and they're just not gonna do it, no matter how much we yell at them to not do it,
It's
really.
also a bad strategy, and it's a I mean, it's a failed strategy, and I think that's part of why I mean, if you remember, like, when Greta Thunberg was, really, really gaining immensely in popularity, there was a section of the capitalist class that was behind her, and I think, it wasn't really until she came out with clearly socialist beliefs that, she became, respected by a lot more people, but obviously wasn't given the same platforms, the same kind of, backing by the capitalist ruling class, and, I mean, I think that they kind of believe that, well, maybe she'll sort of be this environmentalist, support like a solar and wind industry and kind of be um, just sort of like pro nature or something like that, or just sort of anti um, industry or whatever, because that's such a failing, losing strategy, because there's no prosperity doctrine, there's just no leverage, workers have so much leverage. Um, because of their position in the economy. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think he's right to point that out because it's it is a serious problem and it's a serious like negative tendency in amongst the working class because it just plays to all of the weaknesses, when you try to step outside of society or kind of just leave and isolate yourself, then it sort of just takes
Yeah. I
radicalism
mean
and siphons it off.
I mean, I've had conversations with the exact opposite problem too also, where it's like, um, a good friend, and they were coming from a very good place, but, it just was a bad idea. They were saying something along the lines of, "We should allow racists into the Communist Party," and, what they essentially meant was, I'm in a very southern place, and there's a lot of people around me are sort of, quote, unquote, "racist," but, if they want to, fight fascism, they should be allowed into the Communist Party and, uh playing off of mass appeal, I think you have to strike a good balance between the progressive elements and the reactionary elements. You really have to identify them. I don't think his strategy would have worked. He was coming from a very good place, though. Um, but when communists are telling the proletariat, "You're so fucking stupid for using AI. Don't use AI." Um, I it's just a losing battle. It's just a losing battle. They're using the car right now, and we're on our horses, and we're saying, like, "Don't
Mhm.
use the" instead, the critique should be, AI shouldn't be polluting in, predominantly black neighborhoods. AI shouldn't be stealing, people's art. AI shouldn't be used as a leverage to lower our wages, right? Not that AI itself is bad, that, the way it's being used is bad.
Yeah, and I think also I mean, there's 2 things there. One is just that I feel like communism and Marxism, Leninism is a mass politics oriented political tendency, but you have to I mean, at this given the current circumstances, I think it's much better to have a small very ideologically knowledgeable and rigid and capable group of people as opposed to a large big tent coalition where you just have all of these different people kind of filtering in. I mean, I don't I think people sweat it too much when someone is Trotskyist or they're kind of a liberal or whatever, and they just sort of splinter off, because um, it's much better to I mean, why waste your time, arguing with people? Like, why not just focus on building a dedicated coalition and organization of people that can actually do things, and then the masses will start to come, or you'll be able to take advantage of situations where there's this open discontent amongst the masses because you'll have the organization and you'll have a party of people who are on the same page. But if you just bring in, I mean, certainly racist, but even people that just aren't really as capable, you're just weakening the like, you can add 10 people and weaken the organization,
Yeah.
if there are 10 people who suck. And I mean, that's true of any organization, not just political parties. Like, any organizations, I mean, 3 dedicated people working on a project can get a lot more done than if you add in 10 more people and they all kinda suck and, you know, they'll drag everything down. But also, um, yeah, I mean, what was the other thing I was gonna say? Fuck. What did you say at the end?
I don't even remember.
Yeah, my brain is completely broken today. It's late at night. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think the oh, yeah, but I'll just reiterate that point then, because I think it's very important. Is it's nice to have a small, effective, ideologically motivated group of people than kind of worry about like, oh, how are we going to appeal to these people? Like, how are we going to appeal to these people? Like, don't appeal to them. Be staunch, be principled, be argumentative. That will attract people. To be
And
honest.
also just be ready when they're ready, because the conditions of capitalism will eventually make them ready.
Yeah, exactly. The time is so much on our side that um, people gravitate towards. I mean, I'm already seeing it because of the Trump administration. It's kind of crazy the amount of interest that has been generated in communism.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, moving on, Marx talks about how the working class has been given the tools to overthrow capitalism. That's something that no other class has been really given before in history. I mean, fuck, man, how armed is America? Like, we are the most armed proletariat on earth. We just gotta convince people to point the guns the damn right way instead of at each other, you know? And it would be
Yeah.
over in a less than an hour. Um,
And a lot of the people that have guns though are like the most reactionary
yeah, they're
people.
more
Essentially,
speakers now. Yeah.
people say like communists love to say like, "Oh, I have guns too." Like, it's like, yeah, no, you don't. Not like the 5 percenters, not like the Proud Boys,
Or the 3%ers. Yeah.
and those are 3%. Yeah, I mean, those people are like, it's literally all they do, they're just fixated on going to the gun range and shooting guns all day, which, I mean, is not necessary, but, yeah, a lot of them are concentrated in the reactionary sections of the population and the ex-military sections, like the veterans.
Yeah. Yeah, American gun culture is honestly awful. But
Yeah, but anyway, it's
we
they're still like air, basically, so, I mean,
yeah.
you're still right.
Also we have so many other tools. Like I think the internet is one of the best tools for overthrowing capitalism that the Russian I mean, the Russian revolutionaries could have never imagined fucking the internet. Like imagine trying to communicate the revolution with fucking newsletters, letters, papers, getting caught by the czar, getting jailed, going on the run. I mean, and then most peasants weren't even connected to the fucking anybody. Like Bolsheviks literally had to send motherfuckers on bikes to communicate with them, like to talk to peasants in like isolated areas. These party members would have to bike over there in order to collectivize shit. Like it was an impossible job, honestly. And we nowadays, thanks to capitalism, have amazing tools to overthrow the motherfucker, like the internet, cars, trains, guns, I don't know, other shit, whatever you can think of. I mean,
Mm.
the peasants didn't have this shit. Slaves
Yeah,
didn't
and I
have
mean,
this shit.
the internet is interesting too because people have really shown their ability to speak in certain ways that prevent them from being able to censor conversations or control narratives. I mean, people really use it for whatever they want, and it's kind of interesting. Like, there's all these different techniques to try to prevent it, but they just can't really do it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I feel like the only one who's been good, the only nation that's been good at controlling the internet has been China with their firewall. But
And
even
even
then,
they can't really
yeah,
control like what people talk about.
yeah, yeah, they really can't. They really can't. It's
I
impossible.
mean, I see tons of people, like, on Red Note and stuff that just praise Hitler and stuff because they think he, like, really helped out China against Japan and all this shit, and, like, they don't,
Yeah, yeah, no, no,
like,
no. I
South
see the
Korea, the
Hitler
government,
cosplay.
or all kinds of stuff. I mean, they can't
Yeah,
stop
yeah.
it.
But the comments are always all like, "You're a fucking idiot," or worse words like the R word or something like that. But
Yeah.
yeah, Red Note is something else. Um,
Yeah. But I mean,
Mark.
I think, like, the he really especially ends and rounds it out with this view that, yeah, the material conditions create not just give the tools, but also just create the environment for the spontaneous, realization of class struggle and the kind of engine of history, um, developing into a new, era, um, and that, you know, all of these mechanisms to and it's interesting, and I do think that it's clearly mistaken to think that fascism is an indication that capitalism is about to fall apart. I mean, obviously, Germany today is, still a capitalist country, but
Mm.
I think fascism does have a way of kind of creating, progressive forces and creating communism because, it's this naked like face of capitalist domination. So even the mechanisms to try to maintain, capitalism kind of result in its downfall.
Yeah, and
And I think he was
it's a
pretty prescient about that.
it's a resistance to the movement of history and the transformation of the opposite, and we really can't. Like, you really fundamentally can't. It just speeds it along, I think, to some extent, unintentionally, whether they realize it or not. Also, Marx, I think, very succinctly pointed out that, like, capitalism is a culmination of so many trends within human society, right? Like, the law of value has existed since civilized human society. The commodity production, though it was simple commodity production, has existed since the beginning of human society, and these have all been these general economic laws and trends of class society have all been culminated, simplified, put into the mainstream, produced to a point in capitalism where the proletariat could be one of the first classes in history who win in power rather than abusing that power to make themselves a new ruling class could and classes in of themselves. I think that's really what he's getting at within the Communist Manifesto. He's trying to say capitalism has culminated all these general laws of history, all these economic laws of history, all these laws of class society into such a simple forefront that we could destroy it so easily. Well, not easily. Marx never said it would be easy to get rid of capitalism, and it's not easy whatso fucking ever. It's not easy to get rid of classes, but we actually have the chance to do it compared to before, like previous classes.
Yeah. And also it is sort of it really is kind of an eventuality, in my opinion. It's really hard to imagine that, especially when you see the the rate at which the contradictions can accelerate. And I mean, you look at especially the accumulation of debt in countries like the United States and the European countries. I mean, all of that is really driven by in this attempt to kind of solve the contradictions of capitalism. In various ways, and you can really see it catching up to these countries. Wherever they try to look or turn, it just kind of keeps happening. Keep running into this wall of class contradiction. So,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah,
I
right. No, I think all of the Trump administration can be explained by the falling rate of profit, like pretty much. Like it's such a desperate attempt at
yeah,
keeping, yeah, like trying to stop that falling rate of profit. Um, You know,
mm,
in a lot of Marx's work, it really reminded me of this one thing that Lenin said, which turns out actually Hegel said originally. But Lenin said that human history is a spiral. And what he meant by that was like we were in primitive communism, right, where we had a classless society. We were in hunter gatherer societies. We fished, we ate, everything was owned by the tribe. We got civilization with agricultural surpluses. We got class society, and now like capitalism allows us as the final stage of class society to go back like that spiral back into primitive communism, um, but with like all these advanced productive forces, right? Like, like fucking flying cars or Star Trek or I don't know, some shit like that.
Mhm.
I hope we get the Star Trek future, not the Dune future.
I don't know, Dune Future is pretty cool to be honest with you, but yeah, Star Trek's much better.
Star Trek's much better for the people who live in it, I feel like.
Yeah, Dune Future would suck to be honest. Although I don't know, the aesthetics are really cool, but yeah, Star Trek Future,
Yeah, I mean space
not
Arabs,
ideal.
like space Arab cult that's cool, I guess. Like, what actually it's space Bosnians, that's what they are, right?
Mm.
Uh that's
I mean, yeah, there's literally a war now that there's a war where billions of people die. So yeah, I mean, definitely not ideal. But yeah, and it's like a feudal. Yeah, no, that would not be good.
it's space
Um,
Bosnia, right? That's
yeah,
yeah. Okay.
yeah.
Anyway,
But I think yeah, that does highlight an issue with the left though. In a way, because or at least the Western left in America is that it sort of has lost. I mean, and to a fault. I mean, the Soviets and uh communism and Mao's China moved fast and broke things in an effort to revolutionize the economies and kind
mm,
of make them these extremely advanced countries. Um, and I feel like there has sort of been a loss of that, and that's going to be regained as the economic crises get worse in places like the United States, I think, because you can sort of say, hey, let's just say, look at China or whatever, and you can say, well, we should just have, we should have state-owned organizations that just do this stuff, and we shouldn't have to wait around for private contractors. And you'll be able to make a much better argument that socialism is not against the modern world. It's not against um, you know
mm,
industrial production and so on and so forth. But it's actually a both a movement to the future and to the past in the sense of liberating people from wage slavery and unleashing uh, our full potential as a civilization, as a society. But a lot of that, like prosperity doctrine, I think, is the most compelling part to people in general, and that has sort of been lost. I feel like people's perception of communism is that it's like a stagnant but practical um, way of organizing society. But I think like Dr. Timo Rothman said it pretty well. You can look at Vietnam or China or um, a place like Russia before the Soviet Union, and in all of those countries, the Communist Party completely revolutionized the country and solved numerous crises and propelled them into um, a much more advanced state of affairs, and that can be done in um, countries like the United States as well. And more importantly, the egregious contradictions and exploitation and imperialism can be addressed too, so that people actually live in a society in a country that is humanist, that doesn't sit on the exploitation of others and the genocide of others and destruction of others. So um, yeah, I think one thing that the Communist Manifesto captures really well is that spirit of positive change and kind of prosperity, and not in a way that's kind of this dumb like abundant Ezra Klein mindset, but is actually grounded in historical forces.
the left really has lost, I think, its imagination, and I think it's important to imagine a world far beyond even the Soviet Union, because well, let's be honest, China and the Russia were the worst place for a communist revolution to happen possible, and they were still able to achieve all these amazing things through their 5-year plans and rapid industrializations. But in America, in Western Europe, and in other more industrialized places of the world, as socialist revolutions continue to happen and break out, the sky sort of becomes, I think, to some extent, the limit. Obviously, we should be historical materialists. We should be materialists. We should not, we can't just will this thing into existence. But, we can imagine a world far beyond, like, look at all the amazing productive forces that we have within America, where we could even, I don't know, like, get rid of money, so fast. Obviously, there need to be a transition period. We need to be realistic about it. But, we could do the labor voucher so much more easier, Marx's idea of labor vouchers, and get rid of money and, scarcity just almost immediately, which the Russians were almost unable to do because goddamn they were working with the horse plow, right? Like they were working with barely anything. And the same thing with the Chinese. I mean, they were working with peasants who didn't even have fucking shoes, for crying out loud. So I think the left, because of how socialisms were manifested in the most backwards areas of the world, has really lost its imagination about the future that could happen once socialisms break out within Europe's and America, and I don't know wherever else. Is that what you were trying to get at?
Yeah, for sure. And just in general, like the focus is more on mitigating the egregious nature of capitalism and the exploitation. But I think the Communist Manifesto really captures the spirit of not just mitigating
Mm.
and solving the conditions of people under capitalism, but also moving forward into a um, uh, a society that we can dream about. I think that's a compelling like kind of key that's sort of lost.
Yeah, and I think that is a problem with the Marxist-Leninist left, where it's like a lot of times we just end up telling people, "Well, we want the USSR," or no, or at least we don't say that, but like we don't communicate it well, and like it sort of limits people's imaginations. I really do.
Well, part of the challenge is like for that, I mean, you need to have, essentially a new country in place of the United States. You can't have like a continuation of you have to address the settler nature of it. You have to
Yeah.
address, all kind the like, essentially neo-colonial vassals like South Korea, or Taiwan. I mean, it's kind of, you have to address a lot, and so I can understand the hesitance or the fact that you want to emphasize that you're in the belly of the beast, you're within the machine that has to be stopped, but, so it's complicated, but I think we should try to tell that story of how, all that can be addressed and resolved, and, a a proper society, that is prosperous and humanist and not built on genocide and exploitation can be
Yeah.
achieved as well.
Likewise, you're never going to decouple socialism from the USSR. I mean, the I've seen so many left communists and anarchists and this that try. Like we're not like them. We don't believe in that. That was state socialism, yada yada. And you're never going to escape the allegation. So you might as well just learn how to
Yeah, no,
at least to some extent decouple the propaganda from the masses. I mean, what else?
it's also just it's so idealist and unserious because I mean, the case of like China, it's like, well, I mean, they know more about Marxism than you. Like all the people in the government of China know more about Marxism than you. You know, people in the, uh, you know, Stalin and the people running USSR during that time, like they're much more ideologically capable Marxists than, all of these like Western students are. So, what do you mean? Like they just didn't get it and you do? Like they were actually trying to build a socialist country and like they failed and succeeded in various ways, but uh, it's a lot harder to actually engage in the real world and engage
Mm,
with what the real world actually looks like, with what production actually looks like, with what supply chains, what logistics,
mm,
what the material structure of things really is like. You have to think about, okay, what are you going to, there's millions of decisions, like there's a paralyzing amount of decisions that has to be made in terms of how you reorganize um, the economy and society in terms of a Marxist analysis. Is very difficult. So I think, yeah, it's just a juvenile tendency. And I mean, it will never be successful
yeah.
because you're just immediately like, you're basically just telling people like, "Oh, like, I'm actually way smarter than you, by the way." You know what I mean? Like, it's the most, like, off-putting thing ever.
It isolates itself from the proletariat itself too. I feel like, and a lot of them regard their role as not even leading the proletariat or being directly involved, but just educating it from the sidelines, which leads to almost non-action. But not, but also, I mean, I will say Stalin was tripping towards the end of his life. Like towards the end of his life, he was saying like communism in one country was possible. You know, like the stateless stuff, the stateless stuff. He was kind of tripping. I feel like, especially after World War II. He got into some weird ideas, but anyways, that doesn't matter.
Yeah. But I mean, like, you can learn from that, like, okay, there should be, like, you know, more stringent, like, yeah, well, how could we build institutions differently to make sure that, it's more about, really capable and intelligent leaders, at the top all the time. And if people get older, like, they get out of there and you just have better institutions. Like, but you have to engage with the actual, like, historical reality of, like, people trying to do what you're talking about, you know what I mean? Like,
No,
obviously, it's not gonna be some magical fucking thing.
no, no, absolutely. Marx also mentions that the proletariat class as a class is constantly falling more and more into despair, right? Like it's getting bad. He identifies capitalism as like wage labor, selling your wage labor to the capitalists, and proletarians are always in a constant competition with each other. But he also says like the worse that conditions get for the workers, the closer capitalism gets to socialism. Like it's its own gravedigger in that sense. Um, and he also identifies that the aims of the communists in the abolishment of private property is the abolition of classes, the abolition of all these historically pertinent economic things that have existed throughout human society to a higher level, of human existence. Star Trek again. I prefer the Star Trek future. Star Wars is meh.
Me
Star
too.
Wars is like
Star
space
Wars is
fascism.
terrible.
It's space fascism, right? Basically.
Yeah, well, it was in the past to be also, that's the other problem.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so he says, he also refutes, like, he's really snazzy about it. Like, he's all like, "Oh, people say that workers will be lazy under communists. Well, according to this, bourgeois society out long ago have gone to the dogs through the sheer idleness. For its members who work acquire nothing, and those who acquire anything do not work." Right? Like, he's basically saying like workers work, they don't get any money. The people who don't work, they get all the money. Like, capitalism should have fallen by now if it was about hard work or something like that. Um, in addition, he attacks individualism, the idea of freedom. He says like these are just idealist justifications that the ruling classes use to secure power. He has this really great quote: "The selfish misconception that induces you to transform into internal laws of nature and of reason, the social forms springing from your present mode of production and form of property, historical relations that arise and disappear in the progress of production. This misconception you share with every ruling class." So he's talking to the bourgeoisie. He's saying like every single fucking ruling class has thought that it was natural, its system. Every single
Yeah.
ruling class, the kings thought that they were ordained by God. You think you're ordained by hard work and elbow grease, like it's such a pertinent line. Why is he writing for rich people though? Like, does he think rich people are reading this?
Yeah, well, also, towards the end too, he talks about, like, he addresses, like, the 100,000,000 dead, like, Stalin, big spoon, myths of the time that I guess, people have just completely forgotten about, but just, like, um, you know, just different ideas about communism. But it's clearly addressed to, and that's the part of the real limitation of the Communist Manifesto, is it's clearly released to address, like, all of these conceptions about communism. And it's more about, it's more really in general directed towards the bourgeoisie. I mean, the whole thing is really written towards the bourgeoisie,
Yeah.
and like, I guess, the, like, interested worker. But um yeah, I mean, it's a major limitation that I think.
At one point, he's literally saying like, "You guys are always cheating on your wives to the rich." Like, like what? He literally just like it is a diss track towards them, right? Like to some extent. Um, you know, he also has this other great line. What else does the history of ideas prove? That the intellectual production changes its character in proportion as material production is changed. the ruling ideas of each age have ever been the ideas of its ruling class. So he's saying like everybody basically believes the ruling class's ideas. He's getting a little bit at an early idea of the hegemony, right?
Yeah, it's pretty awesome, pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
It's pretty incredible how kind of the seeds of everything is sort of in the Communist Manifesto, and I mean, not really in a developed state, but you can kind of see the beginning of Capital and yeah, even people like Gramsci in there.
Yeah, yeah, and I've actually heard the word communism came from like this branch of it's on Wikipedia. So I don't know how true it is, but it came from a branch in the French Revolution, like the most revolutionary ones in the left wing. They were called communists. That's how the Communist League got its name, at least. And it sort of shows this continuum where uh you can't it's like that seed transforming into the plant destroys itself, like, liberalism directly lends itself and you can't I'm not calling communist, like, a liberal ideology, but it directly lends itself into communism, just this, like, direct line of ideas, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, well, yeah, and also it's interesting how, like, the ideas surrounding the development of capitalism, like, and, end of feudalism marked by the French Revolution sort of form the seeds of the kind of next, um, emerging, kind of revolutionary ideology.
Marx immediately talks about what they're going to do once they seize power, and they're very non-radical. Like his 10-point program, it's like free education for children, centralization of the means of production, centralization of credit, a progressive tax on people, a graduated income tax. That's one of them. And a lot of people say like, well, Marx and Engels denied this, they denied this 10-point program in their 1872 Introduction to the Communist Manifesto. But what I think it really shows his 10-point program isn't necessarily that, this is what we should do once we get power, because a lot of these things have already been implemented, like free child education, for example, or the progressive income tax. But it shows that Marx and Engels are very flexible, in terms of thinking of how we exactly achieve socialism, because they never exactly gave us an exact step-by-step roadmap. Like, even Gother Critique, he does give us, like, ideas like the labor vouchers, but he doesn't say, like, exactly, in exact detail how to do them because, well, he left it up to the future, right? It would have been stupid for him to have written it down. It really depends on the material circumstances surrounding people at that time. And it shows Marx is not as rigid as many people who later, read him make him out to be, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I think also they clearly have this faith in the idea that the masses will kind of spontaneously figure out what to do, and then it's not really for them to decide. And communism is often sort of slandered as a utopian pipe dream, but really, what you see here is just a deep critical analysis of the present day and where it's going.
Mhm. And just leaving the exact nitty-gritties to the future because, again, yeah, there's no utopianism to this. How exactly it plays out, Marx leaves to the future, to people to figure it out. And, in that sense, I think, again, like, and I've been talking a lot about this, I think in visualizing our future revolutions exactly like the Russian Revolution is, to some extent, problematic because we have such a much more productive forces, such a more highly developed economies within America that I think we also need to exercise a little bit of Marx in sort of just leaving it to the future, while also having a short term plan and a long term plan and organizations and things like that. But I don't think we should get too caught up on thinking we should exactly replicate the USSR within America. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to look at the material circumstances and um, you get people that are analytical and scientific in their mindset and just solve tons of problems, facing the economy, facing people, um, making sure people have their needs met, figuring out, I mean, we have issues of national liberation, with indigenous people in the United States. We have to figure that out, have to talk with indigenous leaders to, figure out, land back. You have to
Slavery,
negotiate, like sorry?
slavery.
Yeah, yeah, and you have to negotiate, like, all kinds of things. You have to, reorganize the economy, you have to solve all sorts of problems. You have to build institutions, you have to break other institutions. I mean, so I think the best you want is, you know, the mandate from the masses of the working class, and, a lot of, very highly motivated and, intelligent people that aren't self-aggrandizing, that really just want to, build a new kind of society that can figure out the right thing to do, based on a materialist analysis. And that's, like, very hard, but I don't know. I mean, there's so many we have the advantage of so many historical examples of people really trying to do this,
Oh yeah.
whereas they didn't have anything.
I feel like if and when a revolution happens within America, like we would be flooded with like Cubans and Chinese and I don't know Russians, all just well not Russians because nobody really knows how to build socialism in Russia anymore, but just like all these people telling us, well, this is our experience, this is they could help us out so much in the international solidarity.
It's interesting though, like, I feel like the I feel like China. I mean, the Sino-Soviet split really shows that it's not guaranteed though. I mean, I feel like China and the US would still be adversaries if the US was a communist country. I mean, I don't know though. That's a tough question. Maybe not. It'd definitely be much less tense.
Well, if a socialist revolution happens within America, I think the entire clock sort of standard of the entire world sets immediately into a higher stage of socialism, where these like chauvinistic national fights don't really happen as much as they do, because
Yeah, it'd just
the
be much more strategic and much less like dire. Yeah.
yeah, because the Sino-Soviet split was also related to American imperialism and its effects, on the region. I mean, so there's
Oh
always
yeah,
that.
that's true.
Yeah, that outside influence is gone, and I think we get your true international solidarity. I mean, but even then, like us imagining it is so useless to some extent. But it is fun too. I always find myself imagining it. What will it be like? Finally, Marx rounds out the Communist Manifesto by talking about utopian and reactionary socialisms. I think none of them really matter. There's like nobleman socialism. The only one that matters, I think, is bourgeois socialism, which seeks reforms. Marx says it only seeks a change in the material conditions of existence in economic relations that could be advantage to them. By changes in material conditions of existence, this socialism, however, by no means understands abolition of bourgeois relations of production, an abolition that can be effected only by revolution, but administrative reforms based on continued existence of these two relations, reforms, therefore, that in no respect affect relations between capital and labor. So basically, like Bernie Sanders, right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's like social democracy.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, it's interesting how all those tendencies kind of already existed.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like Lassell was very much uh, also a social democrat in many ways. Like his idea was basically you work with Wilhelm, you work with Wilhelm, you vote in socialism, and then you from like the top down of the German state after you vote in socialism, you fund like communes and workers organizations. Like it was such a dumbass idea. I can see why Marx called Lassell uh actually I won't say what Marx called Lassell. But it was a slur. It was a couple slurs,
Mm.
his famous gamer moment. Um, anyways, ending it, Marx ends the Communist Manifesto with "Working men of all countries unite," which unfortunately we does not happen that easily these days. We have a racism and stuff, but actually, racism was worse during his time, and there was also slavery.
Yeah, that's true. I mean,
Yeah,
yeah, I
yeah.
mean, it's definitely pretty.
It's bad though right now, honestly. Like the international solidarity is non-existent. Like back when Marx was organizing, even liberal parties used to include like working men of all countries. So I don't know.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
it's
I mean, people have become more atomized in general, but I mean, I think people want solidarity, and the more isolated and individualized they become, the more they will want solidarity with others. So I don't know, it could swing back too. But yeah, I mean, definitely like it's just a very powerful ending. That you have nothing to lose but your chains. Um, and yeah, I mean, makes sense that excuse me. It makes sense that ending sentence has been so famous. 'Cause
Yeah.
it's quite well written, especially for something that was put together so poorly, or excuse me, so quickly.
I also think we are seeing sort of the inklings of international solidarity with the Palestine movement, with the Congo movement, with the
Mhm.
Sudan movement. I mean, to some extent, and also the internet is giving us views into the effects of capitalism pretty much on the other side of the planet, in ways that people weren't able to before. So and also as much as yeah, you were saying people are isolated more than ever. They desire community. This is why there's so many weirdos online in different communities. This is why there's so many shooters now because there's these people with a big, deep desire for community that's been destroyed, and this human unity that's been destroyed. That they end up in these like I don't know like fascist, furry, third positionist circles on Discord or some of that bullshit. I don't know, um, and in that sense, I think y- communists should be create community. I don't know, like that should be our first step, really, in terms of just making it fun to go to, making some sort of relation, friendships, things like that, which have been destroyed by especially late stage neoliberal capitalism.
Yeah, I mean, it always reminds me of, Bong Joon-ho, who said, when he made the movie Parasite, in
Mm.
some interview, he said he was just thinking about South Korea and, like, Korean society. But, once he saw how and he didn't really expect it to become such a global success, but, once he saw the kind of traction that it had, he said he realized, we all kind of live in one country, which is the country of capitalism. And he's certainly a very insightful and, like, deep thinking guys, but, I think there are lots of ways that people find themselves stumbling on that fact,
Also,
like you said.
the way that capitalism is breaking down right now and Trump is fomenting people, I see people who otherwise would have been very silent and had no solidarity suddenly standing up for like undocumented migrants. Like there is hope for global international solidarity slowly but surely. I mean, I think the inklings of it are being born right now. Whereas like before 2008 when we were in a very comfortable neoliberal world, it was sort of every man for themselves, a dog eat dog world, you know to some extent. And all that mattered was essentially the family unit and a small friend group, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean also the far right kind of sharing memes and like being in video game communities or whatever together. That's not nearly as galvanizing as something like the Palestine movement is because you're actually engaging and doing something. And the other thing too is it br- it's not ideology first, so it brings lots of liberals into it and, then can kind of form an identity, and then, of course, you'll end up kind of stumbling into Marxism, Leninism, floating around in that space, in that process of really engaging in something, and, that's, I think, really where political movements end up getting galvanized and grow, and gain strength is through actually engaging in real movements, and it might not feel like the left has done a whole lot of that, but to be honest, the left has really, since 2008, engaged in, like, some pretty substantial movements that have kind of forged, the identity of people.
And also, the American working class is getting a lot more spontaneous. I think, especially 2020, the George Floyd protests, the Black Lives Matter protests, sorry, in response to George Floyd's death, showed that the American working class is no longer as complacent as it used to be. I mean, for crying out loud, they were burning police precincts and things like that. And again, like Palestine is once again galvanizing the American working class. Whereas before we sort of had a lull. Um, And so I think slowly but surely, in the death of capitalism, that international solidarity is being rebuilt that the working men of all nations used to have. Um, for example, in the Indian communist movement, in one of the strikes that very famously put communism on the map in India. There were like a couple of British workers that were striking along the Indians. That's become more and more harder to imagine because of how polarized the labor aristocracy has become. But slowly but surely, I think we're getting back there.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, that was a fun talk about the Communist Manifesto. Uh, you got any last words?
Nothing, you have nothing to lose but your chains. Well,
Working men of all country unite.
best last words. I can think
Gooners of
of
all countries unite.
lunars of all that's really what's gonna unite everyone,
Yeah. Yeah.
is
Goon.
gooning.
Everybody goons, right?
That's what the capitalists didn't take into account is the power of gooning.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
All right. See
you
ya.
just seize the means of gooning.
Caesar memes are gooning. Yeah, yeah, yeah. We're gonna take over the servers. You know
Yeah.
the but
Anyway,
yeah. See
take
ya.
care.
Thank you for listening to the Pokepreet podcast. If you want to support our podcast, you can always head down to our Patreon where you can get episodes up to a month early. Workers of the world unite! Long live the immortal science of Marxist Leninism. Thank you.